Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And today is the height of spooky season. Happy Halloween, everybody. Dropping this episode a day early just because it's Halloween. And so why wait till Friday? Because then it's November and then daylight savings time. And then we're getting into Thanksgiving and still autumn, still love the fall, but today's the spooky day. So I'm going to do something a little different tonight. Usually my episodes follow a theme. So it's, Bigfoot sightings in a certain place or UFO sightings or ghost stories. But this week I thought I'd do like a little Halloween grab bag. So stories, we're going to cover some Bigfoot, some ghosts, UFOs, and just some backwoods strangeness. And I may throw in a personal story here that I have not shared on the show before. Uh, so yeah, just hope everyone's having a great Halloween. Hope everybody's safe. Got your candy. I don't get a lot of trick or treaters here, so all the candy I have will probably just be eaten by myself and my son. And that is fine by me. Wish we'd get trick or treaters, but it kind of varies year to year. And I'm seeing a lot of friends having the same thing every year. Sometimes they get tons of trick or treaters and sometimes like nothing. So very strange. But before we move on, I just wanted to make a few acknowledgments. One, I found out recently my cousin Eric watches the show. So, Eric, thank you for watching the show. If you're watching this, I appreciate it. I appreciate any support I can get from friends and family, and I get a lot. So, but I'm always hearing new people saying, "Oh yeah, I watch your show," and it surprises me. So, Eric, thank you. We have a few new viewers and commenters, and I'd like to just give them a shout out while we're doing this. So, welcome to Mary Beth K4L. I hope I'm saying that right on YouTube, and Rhonda Pelletier 2141. You guys have commented recently and have said you like the format of the show, you like what I do here, and I'm always sort of self-conscious about what I'm doing here. I always feel like I should be doing something different or something better, but we're getting a lot of subscribers. The subscriber count goes up every month, and we're getting more and more subscribers every month. Like, you know, back in the day, it was 2 or 3 subscribers a month. Now I'm getting like 90 a month. So it's great. We're really reaching people, and people seem to be enjoying the show, which is great. And I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the discussions and the dialogue, and just all of you. So welcome if you're new here. If you're not new here, thanks for sticking it out with me. And Sean on Instagram, Bootrout. I know you're catching up on episodes, so thank you for that. You just gave me a shout out on Instagram recently. Sean's up in Connecticut, like near Torrington, Bantam, Litchfield, where I camped a lot. I have a lot of episodes on Connecticut and Bantam Lake and stuff like that. So, um, last but not least, I just want to give a shout out to my dad. He's sick currently in the hospital. I'm going to go see him later today. Today's not Halloween when I'm recording this. It's just Halloween when you're listening to it. But I have to go see him later today. I want to go see him later today. I will go see him later today. So, Dad, get well soon. I know you will. You're a strong dude, and fight the good fight, and you'll be home soon. So, yeah, tonight is going to be various stories from Reddit, just people's personal stories, fairly recent. And like I said, I'm doing a little bit of everything because it's Halloween, and I could stick to just ghost stories, but I thought a little potpourri here would be awesome. So, a little Halloween grab bag for you guys. So, let's get started with our first story. So this one comes to us from the subreddit Ghost Stories, which I've used in the past, and this was just posted 2 days ago by user Whole Wafer 54. And I picked this one because it's interesting. We talk about ghosts, and it's usually apparitions, and it's a little girl, or it's a woman in white, or it's a man, a soldier in uniform. This one is a possible ghost car, and we've heard about ghost trains, uh, ghostly ships. The Mary Celeste. There's all these legends about that, but I thought this story was pretty cool because it's a possible ghost car. So let me read what they say. I will start with saying I was 17 years old and completely sober, had maybe drank alcohol 2 times in my life, and was never a believer of anything paranormal. I always thought stories I heard or read were the fakest thing in the world, and grew up with parents who talked down on anything paranormal or any ghost stories. And we hear this a lot. People are not believers until something happens, and then all of a sudden they're believers. So he continues. I was driving with my girlfriend at the time, home from her dad's house to her mom's house on a pretty desolate back road. Not much traffic on that road whatsoever, especially at night, and there's only two houses on the road, which are spaced out pretty far. This road has a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit and is pretty much 100% straight for about a mile and a half, and then there's a 90-degree turn, which is marked well. This particular night, I had been driving on the road for probably 3/4 of a mile, and I checked my rearview mirror, which I normally do multiple times while driving, and I saw some headlights behind me, probably a 1/4 of a mile back, and didn't think much of it, but the lights were getting brighter and closer at a pretty good rate. I was driving about 40 miles per hour and kept my speed. Before I knew it, the headlights were right on my tailgate, and it looked as if they got in the other lane to pass. The 90-degree turn wasn't too far in front of us now, and I thought, holy shit, this asshole is about to pass me with a turn coming up. I saw the headlights in my driver's side mirror now, and I started looking out my window to see who it was driving like that and flipped them off because it was a stupid move to pass there. But there was absolutely no vehicle that passed me. No more headlights, no sign of any sort of vehicle being there. My girlfriend had seen this happen as well. She told me to stop at the 90-degree turn and turn around, thinking that maybe the car crashed in the ditch or went off the road. I turned around and drove back that way, went really slow, and looked on both sides of the road. There was no sign of any vehicle, no tire tracks, no smoke from a crashed car, absolutely nothing. I had goosebumps the rest of the night. I still think about this moment frequently. I have told a few people the story, but mainly keep it to myself because I think it sounds nuts. I still cannot explain what happened that night, and it still gives me the goosebumps to this day. Has anyone else had an experience like this? So we hear a lot of stories about ghosts on the road. It's usually like the ghostly hitchhiker, someone you pick up and then they're in the back seat and then you go to drop them off and they're gone. Like they never get out of the car. Like I said, we've heard about ghost trains, ghost ships. Don't really hear a lot about ghost cars. So I thought this was pretty cool. And he says he sees some headlights. So I don't know if he saw a car or if these were lights. So this one, I don't know what to go with this one because this a UFO that was following him, like small little UFO orbs on the road following him, and maybe they zoomed up into the air and he just didn't see as it was trying to pass him. Was this a car? A ghost car? Was it I mean, I can't see it being a regular car. It doesn't sound like there would be anywhere for it to go that quickly where they wouldn't have seen it or heard it. It didn't crash. It just sort of disappeared. So very cool story here. I like these weirder ghost stories that aren't just the typical, woman in white or the soldier or, the old man or the little boy. Ghost car. So that's pretty cool and a little spooky. So let me know what you guys think he saw. Was this a UFO? Was this a ghost car? Was this just a jerk who managed to zoom off without being seen by the driver or his girlfriend? Very strange. Okay, so this next story, I'm not sure if it's paranormal or not, but it's definitely creepy and spooky and Halloween appropriate, I think. And this comes to us from the subreddit Backwoods Creepy from Zealous Ideal Log 238, Weird Happenings in the Ohio Valley. And he writes, when I was about 10 or 11, my dad lived in an old farmhouse way out in the country in southern Ohio. I mean, the nearest one stoplight hamlet was about 10 miles away, and the nearest proper town was about 10 miles from that. Late 1800s house on about 30 wooded acres. One day, me and my brother, 4 years older than me, are up in the woods with our dog. My dad's rule was that the dog had to be with us if we were going in the woods, which is a good rule. Just fooling around and being rambunctious kids. After a while, we come across what I can only describe as a dilapidated shack, which had to be at least as old as our house. One room with a dirt floor. We went in and found a very old and deteriorated feather mattress laid on the ground, some silverware, and some old kerosene lamps. Being rowdy young boys, we took great pleasure in breaking what was left of the lamps and carving our initials into the wall of the shack. I don't approve of that. But he admits that they're just rambunctious boys and shouldn't have done that, but what's done is done. He continues, at this point, it's getting to be sundown, so we start back down the hill to the house, but our dog isn't moving. He's fixated on the tree line behind us, and his hair is raised and his head is low. No matter how we called him, he wouldn't budge, and he started to growl a low, rumbling growl. Then we heard laughter coming from somewhere in the woods. It sounded like a chuckle at first, then a full-on belly laugh. We then booked it down the hillside after the initial confusion was replaced by fear and adrenaline as the laughter continued, and the dog charged the other way. I heard a commotion behind me about 30 seconds later, and the dog caught up with us. but wheeled back around and stood his ground again, snarling and barking all the while. This repeated till we made it down the hillside and back into the house. I don't know who or what we encountered in the woods that day, but a few things are certain. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. Our dog sensed something in there before we did, and he did not like it one bit. And after that incident, he would frequently sit staring at the tree line in the backyard. I've been back to the property since, and it's now overgrown and thoroughly abandoned, which just adds to the creepy and unsettling vibe the place already had. I couldn't bring myself to actually set foot on the property beyond what's left of the driveway the last time I was there, and couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Again, this property is pretty far out of the way for this to logically have been a drug addict or something, and it was far and away not the only incident to occur out there, but in speaking with my brother about it, even now, 16 to 17 years later, it still slightly rattles both of us. So this one just sort of sounds like a squatter, probably just a guy in the woods living in this shack. I mean, they say the interior of the shack looked like it was old, like everything was worn, very old. But if you have a squatter living out there, they're not going to care what, the mattress is like or what the lamps look like. It's shelter. Could this have been a Bigfoot? I don't know. I mean, simplest explanation is always the best one or the most likely one. So probably a squatter, maybe a drug dealer, homeless person, mentally ill, who knows? But they were laughing, and it's like this big full-on belly laugh, and that's creepy, probably not paranormal, probably not Bigfoot, probably just a weird dude living out in the woods. But still very creepy to go way out there and encounter this, because whether it's Bigfoot or a person or a ghost or whatever, probably not good, especially for boys, young boys to be out there. And the laugh, probably just to scare them off. This guy probably didn't have a weapon, didn't want to come out yelling at them, and just thought it would be funnier to scare them, because if they know there's a dude out there, they may go home and say, hey, mom, dad, there's this guy out there, and they may call the police. But if they think this is a ghost or a Bigfoot or some other, cryptid creature living in the shack behind, in the woods behind their house, they may not tell anybody, and he can continue living there. So I thought this one was creepy, and this was just posted 11 days ago. So fairly recent story that he is sharing. And what do you guys think this was? Was this a squatter? Was this Bigfoot? A ghost? Who knows? But I thought this was creepy. Okay, so this next story comes to us from the Ask Reddit subreddit. And the question here is, have you ever seen a UFO or extraterrestrial? What's your story? And so user ArkinBiblo12, 3 years ago, says, I have not, but my dad and grandpa have. And I think this is a cool story, and we'll get into why. So he says, when my dad was a teenager in the 1980s, he went out hunting with Gramps in southern Idaho. They had made camp at the bottom of some foothills, and the plan was to hike up into them the next morning and start hunting. So early in the morning, probably around 3 a.m., Dad and Gramps start making their way up the hill. One thing to note about this region, it's pretty much just empty grassland and brush. You don't get many trees until you start heading into the mountains. So Dad could easily see their campsite down below them, even in the moonlight. So regarding that, at about halfway up the hill, Dad turns around to take a look at the valley below him, and he's confused by what he sees. Hovering around their campsite, about a mile away, are a dozen or so red lights. He couldn't tell how big they were, but they moved around seemingly at random, not just on the valley floor. Some of them had to have been several meters in the air. This was long before drones became a thing, and the closest human being to them had to have been at least 20 miles away. So yeah, in the 80s, nobody had drones. Just before Dad could raise his voice, Gramps roughly told him to keep moving. So he did, but kept looking back at the red lights, still moving near their campsite. He tried to talk to Gramps, but he just shut him up and tell him to keep walking. Eventually, they made it to the top of the hill, and Grandpa suddenly tells Dad to crawl underneath a bush. They both get under one, and Gramps pulls out his binoculars. Turns out he'd seen the lights all the way back while they were at camp. Apparently, they'd been approaching the camp from the other side of the valley, and Grandpa wanted to get some distance between them before he did anything. They laid there in the bush, quietly watching the lights. They couldn't tell exactly what was going on, but their activity was definitely centered around their camp. At about 5-ish, so 5 a.m., the sun started to peak above the hills, and right as it did, both Dad and Grandpa heard an extremely loud and high-pitched ringing coming from down in the valley. They assumed it was the lights that made the sound. After a few seconds of the ringing, the lights began to rise into the sky until they were out of sight and the ringing could not be heard. It was this event that made both of them question what they'd seen. Grandpa had initially thought it might have been a group of bandits or something, but they can't fly. They stayed in the bush for a good 2 more hours until they decided the coast was clear and proceeded down the hill back to camp. When they arrived, it was clear that something had searched the camp. Nothing had been taken, but items had been haphazardly thrown around, and anything that had been in a bag or container was now strewn around as well. They quickly left after packing everything up and never went back there again. Both of them still live in southern Idaho and will often recount the story whenever extraterrestrial stuff is brought up. So this is, we're hearing a lot of these stories lately, and there's some people who are very close to me who have seen these orbs, and I think I've mentioned that I've even seen orange orbs here on Staten Island one night, very quick, but definitely like 2 orange orbs. These were red, about a dozen, moving around haphazardly. Red lights. So could this have been men with red flashlights? Possibly. I don't understand why 12 or more men with red flashlights would be rummaging through a campsite. There's not usually much of value at a campsite, especially an empty campsite. If someone leaves the campsite, they're going to take their valuables with them, and what are the most expensive things they're going to have? Maybe their wallet with some cash and their guns. You're not going to leave your gun at camp. You go on a hike and you have a gun with you, you're taking the gun. You're not leaving that there for someone to take and possibly use against you. You're going to keep that on you, especially if you're out hunting. You're taking the guns. So what would a group of 12 men be rummaging through a camp for? A sleeping bag, a pillow, someone's clean underwear? Like it just doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially for a group that big. If it was one light, then yeah, maybe it's some squatter, somebody who's living in the woods and needs equipment and waits for these guys to leave. But the grandfather here says he saw the lights coming before they left for camp. So there's this group of lights coming down towards their campsite. They leave, they watch these group of lights. And then again, the obvious thing is that the lights go up in the air. So clearly not men with flashlights, but also clearly not the standard UFO craft, not a large craft with beings on it. It sounds almost like these smaller orbs that people see peeking in windows or floating through backyards or just floating through the woods sometimes. And they seem to be intelligent or intelligently controlled. They're small. They're not actual craft. They're just kind of like lights. And they're clearly not like Chinese lanterns or anything of that nature. It wouldn't have been lightning bugs. One, lightning bugs aren't red. Two, you're not going to see lightning bugs, flying around your camp from a mile away. Just not going to happen. So I thought this one was weird just because it's a UFO by definition. It's unidentified. They're flying and they're objects, but it's not the standard like flying saucer craft, or black triangle or cigar shape UFO that we usually hear as far as a craft. And it's just these light orbs that we're hearing more and more about in the woods, and people have been seeing them for years. And again, I have some stories that were told to me long before this became like popular on podcasts and in the paranormal communities. People seeing these weird intelligent orbs, and just very strange. So thought this was a cool story. What do you think these guys saw? Let me know in the comments below, and we will move on to another story. Okay, so the last of the Reddit stories for this episode comes to us from the subreddit Bigfoot, from user Merjosh, M-E-R Josh, like merman or mermaid, but Merjosh. And usually with Bigfoot stories, I go to the BFRO database. But since we're not doing a theme here, I just figured like, let me find a cool Bigfoot story from Reddit and just do that just to kind of break that pattern of BFRO stories, because there are other stories out there and I don't really tap into them too much. So I thought this one was cool. So let me read his story. And he says, okay, going on a limb here and sharing my story. And again, a lot of people, it's hard for them to share their stories with family or friends. So doing it anonymously can sometimes help, because you kind of get it out, you tell people without people kind of laughing in your face or thinking you're silly, which can often be the case, sadly. So he says, I'm a Silicon Valley, San Jose native and have frequented the adjacent Santa Cruz Mountains all my life. This incident happened on the Loma Prieta Grade Trail in the forest of Nicene Marks, SP, in the late summer of 2019. So he says, basically, my girlfriend at the time and I were hiking on a Wednesday morning. There were definitely already people around. This is a popular trail as it's really beautiful locale. That said, there were also stretches when it was just the two of us. I think it's a 5 mile-ish hike total, and we were about an hour in when my girlfriend had to pee. There were thick trees on both sides, so we looked for a clearing on our right side. We saw not really a path, but an opening, and walked past the tree line, maybe 20 to 30 feet in. And you should do that if you're on a trail and you got to go, try to get as far away from the trail as you can. She wanted to be out of sight of anyone who passed by. I tossed her my backpack, which had toilet paper, and she ducked behind a tree. I walked back down the clearing about halfway, but I could still see her. She's squatting and peeing, and I'm just waiting. Like I said, I could see her the whole time. It was darker inside the trees, obviously, but I could still see just fine. It was daytime, so I get it. So I'm standing there with nothing to do but look around me. That's when I caught movement of something on my left. There was a medium-sized tree with a very distinct, very dark hand on it. It was about 10 or so feet away. At first, I thought it was someone wearing black gloves. I don't know why, but I immediately thought it was some biker, I guess he means hiker, perv, looking in on my girlfriend peeing. That's when I saw the face peek out and everything turned upside down. I can't say what with full certainty, but I'd say it was about 7 to 8 feet tall, easy. I'm 6'2". I only saw half of it, but it was everything you would expect from a classic description of Bigfoot. Big black eyes, large flat nose, dark skinned with blackish grayish hair. I could see only a hint of a conical skull. Really, based on nothing in particular, I feel like I saw a female. And that's interesting. A lot of people, just to pause here, when they see a Bigfoot, they'll sometimes get a sense of gender, even if they're not seeing genitalia or breasts. They just kind of get a sense that, oh, this was a male or this was a female. I don't know why, but I think that's interesting that he mentions that, and not sure why. I just do. He says. To continue, anyway, it peeked back and forth twice. The eyes were mesmerizing. That's the best way to describe it. They felt like they were looking right through my soul. I wasn't scared really, but I was definitely in shock, like the way seeing a car accident feels like everything is in slow motion. And let me confirm what others say. There was no way I had the wherewithal to pull out my phone and take a picture. No way. I was totally engrossed in the moment. This was all in the space of maybe 20 to 30 seconds, and the whole time I'm watching this thing, I'm hearing the stream of my girlfriend's urine. So girlfriend is still peeing. Weird, but I was acutely aware of both things at once. The second time it peeked out, it looked at me for a few seconds, then ducked back behind the tree, but also sank like it was going into the ground. That was the last I saw of it. My girlfriend finally finished, and when she came back toward me, that was when the fear hit me. Not like I was in danger right at that moment, but more like the reality of what I saw finally hit me. I quickly took her hand and pulled her back onto the trail. I didn't say what I saw, but I said we had to go back ASAP. She was confused, but I explained to her what I saw as we walked back at a much brisker pace than when we came up. So to pause again, he's saying he's seeing this thing and he's hearing his girlfriend peeing. And I mentioned in an episode previously that psychologically, our brains, when we are in a trauma situation, so car crash or anything else like that, where we're not just kind of relaxed. When we get kind of focused like that, we're going to focus on certain things. So we may remember exactly what we saw, but we may not remember the exact time of day or the date or even the year, like that kind of gets lost to time. So for this guy to hear his girlfriend peeing and to be watching this thing, and those are the two things he's really focused on, that just sort of tells me he's having this experience. He's can't believe what he's seeing, but he's still, a part of his brain is paying attention to his girlfriend. He's not looking at her, but he's hearing her. And it's almost like he's making sure she's still there. She's peeing. She's okay. Like this thing didn't get her. Another one of these things didn't get her. She's still okay. So that was a very interesting detail to me that he mentions. And I don't know if many people would pick that up, but the two things he's paying attention to are this creature and his girlfriend. He's worried about her safety. So he continues to say that his girlfriend believed she's Canadian and has an uncle and cousin who claimed to see one when she was growing up. So that was good. She actually wanted to turn around and see if we could find it, but I wasn't quite in that space just after it happened. I'd say I was generally a Bigfoot believer prior to this, but not anywhere near a fanatic or anything, and it's not like I set out looking for anything. I know people argue that if you have Bigfoot on the brain, and I mention this a lot, Bigfoot on the brain, if you go out in the woods looking for Bigfoot, then, every weird indentation in the ground, every tree break, every twig snapping, it's Bigfoot. So I appreciate him saying this. I know people argue that if you have Bigfoot on the brain, you're more likely to jump to that conclusion in certain situations. I did not. In fact, the whole hike, I was complaining to my girlfriend about my manager at work. Bigfoot was the last thing on my mind. I'm okay with what happened a year later, but I had strange dreams for weeks after. My girlfriend thought it was a great story, and she'd tell our friends over beers and stuff, but I'm not entirely comfortable with people knowing. But like I said, I'm far away from it now to at least share it here. So yeah, it's tough for people to share and be laughed at and to have people think differently of you. So he finishes up. Yeah, it's possible a huge guy in a suit was out there at that exact time and in that exact spot, but I don't think so. I'm 99% sure I saw a Sasquatch. So he gets a good look at this thing. He sees the hand around the tree. He thinks at first it's a person wearing a glove, just another hiker out there. Then he sees the face, he sees the eyes, he sees the skin. Could this have been a person in a costume? Of course. And skeptics will just try to convince you that there's just, dozens of people running around, whatever forest or woods area that you're near, just running around in gorilla suits and trying to scare people. And none of them ever get shot. None of them ever take a bullet. None of them ever get seen. It's just weird to me. So a really cool story. And again, I like that he mentions the Bigfoot on the brain. He wasn't thinking about it. The strange dreams for weeks after. That is something that I've experienced, not after seeing Bigfoot, but after doing a paranormal investigation. We did a place here on Staten Island called Snug Harbor and a building called the Governor's House. And we got assigned to it incorrectly. We wanted to do another building on site called the Matron's House, which allegedly had tons of activity, and the Governor's House didn't have as much. But we did the Governor's House, and we all had some weird experiences there. And I'll do another episode on that another time. But just to tie into the dreams, I remember I was having weird dreams about the Governor's House for like weeks after, and got together with my friends again in the ghost hunting group, and someone else had mentioned like, hey, I'm having dreams about the Governor's House. And I was like, me too. And then a third person in our group also said he was having like these recurring dreams after investigating. So does that mean it's paranormal? Not necessarily, but I just thought it was an interesting thing, that when these things happen, it can affect us. And like in our group, it was like 3 out of the 5 of us, or whoever that was having weird dreams for like weeks after. And I don't blame this guy for having weird dreams. I mean, you're in the woods and you're worried about your safety as well as your girlfriend's safety. You're seeing a Bigfoot. It's weird. So again, it doesn't sound like this guy saw a bear. He saw a hand. He said this thing was 7 or 8 feet tall. It was taller than him, and he's 6'2". I'm 6'1". So when something is taller than you. Because if you're a tall person like me, everybody's kind of shorter than you. So you see somebody taller than you, that's kind of a unique situation, especially when they're that much taller. It's not like, oh, this was an inch taller than me. He's saying a foot or two taller than him. So very cool story. And again, I really dug that he had this like dual focus, that he's focused on the creature, he's focused on his girlfriend. That to me is a very subtle but important detail for me as a psychologist. So what do you guys think? Did he see Bigfoot? Let me know in the comments below. All right, everybody. So that is the end of the Reddit stories. I did promise a personal story, and I've never mentioned this one before because I just don't put too much stock in it. But frequent commenter on our videos, Fly Spec Cafe, had mentioned something a few weeks ago about people seeing owls and them as being like possible aliens, like, or extraterrestrials or whatever, and there is a lot of that. You read in the literature, and there's this weird correlation between like UFO sightings and owl sightings, and skeptics will say that, oh, Mothman was an owl, and the Hopkinsville goblins were owls, and all these other weird things that, and owls are kind of creepy. This story has nothing to do with owls, but it was an interesting story that I wanted to bring up. And it's something that I haven't thought about in a long time. But his comment about the owls made me remember this. And I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and my family and some of my cousins and some family friends, we all went to the Poconos and swimming in a lake, and we had cabins and such, and not even like rustic cabins. I mean, it was like hotel room cabins, you know. And I have this very vivid memory of being in bed, and it was me and my younger brother, and the two beds were side by side, and I was in one bed and he was in the other, and I was on the right hand side, and you know, in front of us was a wall with a TV and a dresser. And I just remember being a kid, and this is before I was really like deep into the paranormal stuff. I was still a little too young. It was probably shortly after this that I got more into it. But like I said, I was probably about 7 or 8, and I remember a praying mantis man being in the room with me, and he was kind of between the beds and just looking at me. And I don't remember if he said anything. And I believe I mentioned this to my parents, and they probably don't remember. I don't remember their reaction, but I feel like I did tell them, like, hey, there's this praying mantis, like a man in my room. And if you can imagine that, you know, it's this kind of tall insect figure with big bulging eyes and the pointy head. And it sounds a little bit like a gray alien. And I didn't make that connection at the time. At the time, it was just like, why is this giant praying mantis in my room? But that was the impression I got. And it's this weird memory. And I didn't mention it on the show before because most likely a dream. I mean, I was a kid, I was in this room. I don't remember being scared of it though. And that's the weird thing. It was just kind of like, oh, like, why is this praying mantis man in the room looking at me? I don't remember if it said anything. I don't remember being scared. I just feel like I mentioned it to my parents. And like I said, they probably don't remember. I didn't even ask them because this was, you know, you're going back 42 years. And they were probably outside with their friends having fun, probably having a few drinks. And I'm saying, hey, there's a praying mantis man in my room, you know, but just very weird to me. And like I said, it's you have these people who see the Hat Man or people who see owls looking in their windows and right after they've seen a UFO. And what is the correlation there? And I don't remember seeing a UFO. I just remember being in the room and it being somewhat dark and this praying mantis man just looking at me. Very strange. So I don't, again, I chalk it up to like a dream or a kid's imagination. I don't think it was paranormal, but just Fly Speck Cafe's comment reminded me of it, and I thought I'd share it here. Just seemed appropriate. Spooky story for Halloween. Don't know what to make of it. What do you guys make of it? I'd love to hear your comments on that. Am I crazy? Was I just a kid who was dreaming? Have you ever seen a praying mantis man or an owl looking in your window or anything weird like that that seems somewhat normal, but also abnormal? Because I feel like the human experience has these things sometimes. And is it psychological? Is it paranormal? Is it preternatural? Who knows? But just wanted to share that on Halloween. And that'll do it for this week, everybody. Shorter episode, but you get it a day early. So there you go. Thanks to everybody who's been watching and commenting. Welcome to the channel if you're new here. If you've been with us for a long time, thank you for sticking it out with me. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for the feedback. If you guys have a story you would like to share, or if you'd like me to read on air for you, jason@oddanduntold.com. Shoot me an email, or if you just don't want to, you know, post your comment publicly, if you just want to talk to me privately, I answer all my emails. So you can have a conversation with me privately. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Odd and Untold. Just look for us and you will find us. And until next time, everybody, question everything. Did I see a praying mantis man? Were those red lights UFOs? Did this guy and his peeing girlfriend encounter Bigfoot? You gotta ask the tough questions, because maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I thought these were very cool stories. And until next time, everybody, rock and roll and have an awesome Halloween.